What's up, everybody? TCM here, back with another video. Today we're going to be doing TryHackMe's Attackive directory. And we did this maybe a week or two ago on live stream. If you're not watching the live stream, where the heck are you? We're over at twitch.tv/thecybermentor. And we covered this box, and I think it's actually pretty good about some Active Directory items that we should talk through, some tools that we should talk through. There's a lot of realistic expectations in this machine, and we're only attacking a domain controller. So that's kind of why I picked this. Another reason why I picked this is it's 100% free at the time of this recording. So you can see here it's a free room. So if you're looking to join along with me, you can check out tryhackme.com/room/attackive directory. You will need to sign up for an account, but that is also free. So what are we going to do here? Well, we're going to look through this. We're going to join up. We're going to go ahead, and I've deployed the machine about 10 minutes ago just to prep through this. You can see I've already done this machine, so it's just going to kind of be a walkthrough while we talk through some of the tools. I've also got a port scan running right now. I don't know how long this is going to take. Last time we ran this on live stream, it took quite a while, so we're going to kind of just talk through some of the things. Now, when we talk about Active Directory, a lot of you know what that is. If you're not tracking what Active Directory is, it says up here that 99% of corporate networks run off of AD. I don't know how accurate that is, but I know the number is at least 90% of the Fortune 500 use it. I would expect more than that. So when we talk Fortune 500, we're talking about the 500 largest companies. I don't know what it is in revenue or whatever, but they utilize Active Directory. Now, Active Directory is Windows-based. You can think of it like a phone book almost, and that allows you to contain users, to have computers, to have directories of stuff, to have shares, to have all different kinds of features, to implement policies. There's a lot that you can do with Active Directory. If you've ever worked in a work environment where you had a set of credentials, your username and password, and you can log into your computer, but then you can go over to another computer and log in there, likely it was Active Directory on that machine or in that environment. Okay, so a lot of companies use Active Directory. You might find small networks that don't, but most companies do. And this is important from an internal aspect. When we're talking about internal penetration testing and hacking internal networks, it's all Active Directory for the most part. So important stuff to know. There's a couple of cool little features in here that we'll go through, some tools that we'll use that are realistic. If you've seen any of my other videos in Active Directory, some of this may be familiar to you. If you've seen the Udemy course, some of this may be familiar to you. So sit back, enjoy the video, and let's go ahead and just dive right into this. So I've already spun up the box. I've got an IP address here. I'm going to copy this IP address, and I'm going to edit my Etsy host, which this might still be in there from the last time I did it. I just want to have this as something that I can call with a name. So you see spookysec.local. That's exactly what we're going to call this. And I might be jumping the gun just a little bit here, but you can go ahead and do this as well. Just gedit your Etsy host or Nano or Vim or Vi or whatever it is you want to do, and go ahead and put that in there. I'm going to save this, and then we should be able to call out this machine now. So the first thing it wants us to do, though, after deploying this machine is it wants us to use a tool called Impacket. And we're going to just install Impacket. Now, I've already got this installed. So what we're going to do instead is I'm going to kind of show you how to do it. They've already got instructions here. So if you just follow along with these instructions, actually, fairly straightforward. Put this where you want to put this. They've got it going to opt. I would recommend putting in opt as well. And then just run your pip3 install, and it should work. Now, I have noticed some issues with Impacket past the version of 0.9.19. So if you run into issues with this, you might want to go out to GitHub and try a different version of this. But for the most part, you should be okay with running it how it is. It's just been kind of wishy-washy the last few versions. So I've actually stayed on a older version more so than anything else. But you can come in Impacket. And I believe off on the right side, there are releases. So if you come into releases here, you can actually go into 0.9.19 and download that one instead if you want. But give it a go with 0.21, see if it works. Hopefully it does. If you run into any issues, that's probably your issue. So once you have that installed, go ahead and hit done. Pause the video if you need to. We're going to come back through here, and now it says enumerate the DC. So the next step here would be running an nmap scan, which our nmap scan is back. And I just did a basic nmap scan on this. So if you want to look through this, I ran nmap. Let me make this bigger. I ran nmap here, and I said, hey, I want to run a speed of T4. We're going to run it verbose, and we're just going to scan all ports. Now, if we're scanning a domain controller, there are a few ports that we would expect to see open. 53 for DNS would be one that I would expect to see open. 139 and 445, even 135, all these related to SMB or RPC, I would expect to be open, especially if there's any sort of file share being done from the domain controller. 3389, sometimes you'll see that, sometimes you won't in a real environment, but a lot of times domain admins like to just RDP into the domain controller, so you will see that open. Other ones that you might see open is like 88 for Kerberos, 389 here for LDAP, and the alternative, which I think is 636. Yeah, it is 636 for LDAP S. So a lot of little indicators here for different things that this would be. If I were scanning this machine and not knowing what it was, is what I'm trying to get at, is that I would know immediately from seeing 88, from seeing 636, 389, etc., that this is most likely a domain controller. All right, so we'll get more into what some of this stuff is in just a little bit. Now, it wanted us to enumerate and find some information out here. So it asked us how many ports are under 10,000. It says 11. I counted 16 originally, something along those lines. There's a lot more than 11 here, I think. At least the first time I did it, but the scan says 11, or the hint says 11, and the answer is 11. It asks us what tool will allow us to enumerate port 139 and 445. Enum for Linux, but I don't think Enum for Linux is the best tool anymore. It's kind of had issues. Every time I run it, it's like broken. There's problems with it. So I like to use SMB client, which we can show real quick. If you've seen any of my videos, you've probably seen me use SMB client at one point or another. So we could try SMB client and just do a -L and see if we can list out this directory. What we're looking for is to see if there's any sort of shares here that we can access without having credentials. So we have no access at this point. It says access denied, status mismatch. We can see a share name, but there's no shares here. So we'll come back to this. We could go further into enumerating port 139, 445 with Metasploit. We could try to find out version information. We can do a -A on this port specifically to see if we can pull SMB version. Maybe there's an exploit related to that specific SMB version. Maybe this is a Windows machine that is running dated software and it's got Eternal Blue on it. There's a lot of possibilities on exploits that can be running on 139, 445. For the direction of this video only, we're going to skip that and just follow the instructions that are being told to us, only because it's just going to make life easier. Now, it wants to know the NetBIOS domain name of the machine. That is not going to come up for us unless we run a -A. I do not run a -A only because of the time-consumingness of that. We can put in specific ports, though. We can say 139, 445 like this and do a -A. And then we can pull down information based on what we're looking for. So this might take a minute to run, but trust me when I'm giving you the answer here that the port or the NetBIOS domain name of the machine is going to be TryHackMe-AD. The top level domain is .local, and it says what top level domain do people commonly use for their Active Directory domain? It says invalid. We use .local, but in realistic scenarios, in environments and stuff, I don't know how big this is going to be, but you might see something like, let's say this is called spookysec.local, spookysec.local. You might see a .org or .com or .net inside the real Active Directory environment. So when you're doing a pen test, anything's fair game, although most of the time I would say that I still see .local. But I've seen all sorts of anything you can imagine. I've probably seen it in here as the domain name. So let's go ahead and close this. So we're just trying to kind of quickly get through this. I want to get to more of the meaty stuff. This is more just reintroducing some topics and concepts that if you've been watching the channel, you should be familiar with. And you can see now that this came back. Let's see if it came back with any information here. It did find a little bit of information. SpookySec, it found spookysec.local. Well, that's something we provided. Let's see. It didn't actually come back. We might have to -A this whole thing to pull down the information, and that's okay. We're not going to do that for just for time's sake in this video. But you're more than welcome to -A with the -P- and find out this information as well if you want to see it. But I'm promising you it's there. So next step, it's saying, hey, let's enumerate the DC. So we're going to enumerate the domain controller, and it wants us to use something called Kerberoot. So you can see it's talking about Kerberos, and it says Kerberos is a key authentication service within Active Directory. We're going to talk a little bit about how Kerberos works here in a little bit. Actually, let's kind of pause, and we'll talk about Kerberos here for a second, and then we'll come back to this. I think this is a good point. So if we come here, let's go ahead and just get my marker out. So if we talk about Kerberos, let's say that you are a user, and ignore my drawing, please. Let's say this is you, your happy little computer, and this is the domain controller here. The domain controller is what's known as can be known as a KDC, or a key distribution center. You've seen me talk about this in Kerberoasting, and we'll talk about this in a little bit, but it's known as a KDC. So this key distribution center, say that you are trying to authenticate with Kerberos. What it runs off of is it runs off of tickets. So we can come in here and present a username, and we can request what's called a TGT. So we'll make a request. We'll provide our username and password to the domain controller and say, hey, I want access. Can you please provide me a ticket granting ticket? And the domain controller, the key distribution center, will check this. They'll make sure that your credentials are valid, and then they'll say, yes, you can authenticate. Here is your TGT. Okay, so right now, all we need to know about is this ticket granting ticket. Okay, so keep that in mind when we go back to this. Ticket granting ticket, super important. Otherwise, I'm going to erase all this for now. And then we're going to go ahead and come back to our screen. So we are going to try to utilize a tool called Kerberoot to find users in Active Directory. Now we can utilize this to actually kind of spray and pray and find out if there are users and passwords, or users with weak passwords. But for now, what we are going to do is we're going to just attempt to find usernames. Say we're in an environment and we don't know the usernames. Now, if you're doing an internal pen test, chances are that you're going to be able to find a lot of usernames because you can probably figure out the internal structure. You might be able to do some research outside. You might be able to go to something like a hunter.io or a dhash or a website where you might be able to find information on how their naming structure is, or even internally you might be able to figure out their naming structure without having to run tools like this. So I've never ran this on an assessment, not saying that you can't utilize it, but it's just not something that I personally use. But we're going to use it here to find usernames because we have absolutely no knowledge of our environment or what's in our environment. On top of this, it's saying here it's not recommended to brute force credentials. That is 100% accurate. One of the questions that we ask of clients before we conduct a penetration test, especially internal or external, we want to know the lockout policy, because if we're password spraying or we're doing something along the lines of trying to guess passwords, we want to make sure that we aren't locking users out and causing a denial of service. The worst thing that we can do is spray and pray password 5 times or 10 times against all the accounts in the network, and then IT's like, hey, everybody's locked out of this network. So you got to be very careful. You should know the lockout policy prior to doing any sort of brute forcing. Here we do not, so we're not going to brute force without that. Okay, so we're going to use this tool called Kerberoot. They are actually giving you a link here, so if you open it, now this might be a place where you might not be able to follow along here. You do need Go. Now I'm not going to cover on how to install Go or any of that. I recommend that you go out there and look for Go yourself. If you're just trying to watch and learn, that's fine. Go has its own installation and everything else involved with it. But for the most part, all you would have to do if you want to install this, which I'm not necessarily seeing the install, would be a go get on the install somewhere. It's down here. So go get github.com. This right here, you just literally copy and paste that, and it will install into your environment. Okay. So what we're going to do is we're just going to utilize this to brute force. Now, what they have done for us is they provided a username and a password list. So you can see here's a user list, here's a password list. they told us to utilize this so we don't get stuck staying in password hacking or cracking mode, just to give us a little bit of ease of time, which I do appreciate. There are some TryHackMe boxes where the password takes forever to find, so I really do appreciate this. So I did make a folder called Attackive here, and I've already gone ahead and put the passwords and users in here. So all you have to do is just come in here and copy this, put it into a folder that you want, etc. And then here you go, it's in here. So we're going to go ahead and move forward with the first part of this. I know it's been 15 minutes already and I'm just rambling on, but it's important to talk about the precursory items and why they're important before we dive right into just showing tools. You're not going to understand why we're doing what we're doing. So for Kerberoot, we're going to go ahead and just say Kerberoot here. We're going to do what is called user enum like this. And you could do a -- help, by the way, and see all this information here. So I'm doing user enum, which is enumerate valid domain usernames via Kerberos. Okay, so we're going to do Kerberoot, and we're going to say user enum. Let me clear screen so you guys can see it at the top. The domain that we're providing is spookysec.local. And then we're going to provide a DC IP address, which is going to be the same thing. And then we're just going to say users.txt is what we're going to utilize. So we're saying, hey, here's our domain. Here's the domain controller. Here are the users that we're providing. Okay. So I want you to utilize this user list. Where'd it go? This user list. And see, does info@spookysec.local exist, or admin at, etc., etc. So we're going to push that through. And you're going to see it's running through that list, and it's already finding things here. Like it found James, it found service admin, it found Robin. And we need to look for things that might be important. It's good to have these names, but then again, it's also something should jump out at us, right? And it asks us that question. I'm skipping ahead just a little bit for the sake of time. What notable accounts jump out to you? Okay, service admin jumps out to me, and backup, which we'll see here shortly, will jump out to you as well. Service admin and backup, because they might have administrator access or some sort of access, especially if it's named admin, that would allow us to gain access or further access in the environment, especially if they have a weak password. I'm going to Control C here. I'm going to kill this. We don't need to run this. Okay, now, before we get into the next step, we got to backtrack and talk a little bit about why these things are important, okay? So I'm going to grab out my fancy writing tool again, and I want to talk through this one more time. So remember, we had our happy little computer, and we had the KDC. Now, if you've ever heard me talk about something called Kerberoasting, what is Kerberoasting? Okay, so we have the KDC here, we have us. Now, we saw just a second ago, we saw that service-admin account. What does that make us think that that possibly is? It's probably a service account, right? Now, all services, let's say you had a service that you want to access. We'll call it down here. We'll just say service. This service here utilizes what's called a service principal name. And if we were in a real environment with a password already discovered, let's talk about that first, then we're going to backtrack a little bit. Okay, so Kerberoasting. Remember when we requested, we sent this off, we sent our credentials, and then we said, hey, I want to get a TGT. If we have a valid user, we have a valid TGT. Now, what we can do is we can utilize a tool or a process called Kerberoasting, which is just a Windows process, all right? We can come in here and we could say, hey, I want to access this service. Okay, so the service is existing. A service can be SQL, it could be anything you want it to be. It could be like McAfee, it could be Sophos, like antivirus type stuff. Whatever service is running, this is over here, okay? Now, say you want to be able to access this service as your user. What you say is you say, hey, KDC, I have a valid TGT. And this is all you need to be able to try to access the service. Note, I said try. Okay, so TGT is all you need, a valid set of credentials. You say, KDC, I've got a TGT. I want to access this service down here. And you say, here's my TGT. And the KDC will say, okay, I see that you have a valid TGT. I'm going to go ahead and present you a TGS. And I like to just think of this as a service ticket. Now, what is so special about the service ticket? In the real world, you would take this TGS, you would present it to the service The service would look at it and verify if you had access or not. The KDC does not verify if you have access to the service does. So if you do have access, the service will grant you access. We do not need to do this. What's happening here, and as part of this process, is this TGS is encrypted. It has a hash. Now the hash is the username and password required to access the service. We present the TGS. The TGS here, the service will know the username and password. It'll decrypt it and then decide whether or not we need to have access. We don't need to know that. If we have the TGS, we have the hash of this service account. We can then take that hash offline and try to crack it without ever presenting that ticket here. That is what's called Kerberoasting, as long as we have this valid TGT. Okay, so I know that might be confusing, but just know that this is a regular feature of Windows Active Directory. So if there are service accounts running in an environment, if they're running with weak passwords, we can crack them. If they're running as domain administrator and with a weak password, we crack them and we're a domain admin, we just took over the environment. It's really that simple. It's a very common attack and it happens all the time. Okay, so service accounts are a thing. They shouldn't have domain admin access and they should not have weak passwords. So now let's clear that. We're going to do something very, very similar, except we're going to skip one part of this. So if we come back, we're going to go into this exploiting Kerberos portion. And we're going to do something called as rep roasting. Now, as rep roasting is when there is a feature set on an account that says does not require pre-authentication, meaning the account does not need to provide valid authentication before requiring a Kerberos ticket. Okay, no TGT is needed. If we don't need TGT, we're pre-authenticated. Guess what? We don't need a credential set. We need a credential set to get a TGT, right? Well, if we're pre-authenticated or don't require pre-authentication, then we don't need to get that TGT. We can still perform that type of Kerberoasting attack, except here it's called as rep roasting, and we get a hash. Okay, so we're going to utilize Impacket here. And have we utilized Impacket yet? I don't know if we have. Let's see. I don't think we have. Okay, so this is the first time we're utilizing Impacket. Good. Impacket is one of the best tools in. If I'm doing an Active Directory pen test, it's like my number one tool. I would rather not have Nmap or anything else than have Impacket. Okay, I want Impacket as my main tool. There are just so many things here that you can get away with and do in an environment that is just like a huge Swiss Army knife for Active Directory pen testing. Okay, so we've got this tool here. It's saying get MP users, and this is going to perform as rep roasting. Okay, if we were doing something along the lines of Kerberoasting, it's not get MP users, but it's very similar along the lines of the syntax and would do the same thing, but we would have to have a valid account to do that. Because we don't need a valid account, watch what happens here. So we're going to say get MP users, and it should just be autocomplete once you have it installed. We're going to say spookysec.local, and we're going to say service admin with no pass. We don't need to provide a password here. And boom, this is it. Same thing with Kerberoasting. Look, this is the asrep hash. Kerberos would provide a Kerberoasting hash here, and I mean that's it, honestly. Super easy, super straightforward, okay? So what I've done is I've copied this and I've already gone ahead and put this into a file. So if we cd to Attackive again, if you cat out the hash.txt, you'll see that it's just already in this folder here. So go ahead and store that into a hash.txt or whatever you want. And then what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and try to crack this. Now I forget what it is in Hashcat, and I can't use Hashcat in this machine because my GPU does not play well with this, or my CPU does not play well with this. It doesn't like the architecture. So what we're going to do here instead is we're going to use John, which is built in, and we're just going to say John hash.txt, and then you're just going to give it a word list. And for this word list, we're going to use the passwords.txt that we already have in this folder that we should have saved. Now, this one might not crack because it's probably in the pot file for me. Yeah, so you're going to see loaded one hash, no hash is left to crack. I've already cracked this. But you should, in theory, crack this on your own here. So you should see something come up on your side of the house. All right, do you see it? It should be management 2005. Management 2005. What is that telling us? Management 2005, that is the password for service admin. So let's put service admin in here. We'll put the password of management 2005. That way we know the credentials. Now, there are things that we can do right away from this point. One thing that I would try immediately would be, okay, I've got access to the service admin account. Is the service admin is it a domain admin, this user, or what's the deal with the service admin? So you could use a tool like psexec.py. You could use smbexec.py. You could use wmiexec.py and try to gain access to this. Okay, so what I'm going to go ahead and tell you is there is no access. Now, if you're newer to this might be a little overwhelming. The service admin we can utilize. So say service admin had write access to SMB. That's what we're checking with psexec.py. Do we have write access? Can we execute in a folder as an administrator? Most of the time that means we're an admin on that machine and we gain shell. It doesn't have to be the case every time. It's just the majority of the time that you're going to find that you're a local administrator or an administrator that can do that kind of action. Since I'm already kind of giving you the hint that we cannot, we need to take this further. Earlier in the video, we said, hey, let's do an SMB client and let's do a -L. And we did that, but we did that without any user, right? So instead, what we're going to do is we're going to try that again and see what happens. Let's do a --help on the SMB client. And we're going to provide a username here. And then we're going to see if that works out for us. So let's go ahead and see if we can just do a -L. And we're going to try on 10.10. Actually, do this. 10.10.221.125 like this. We'll do a -u and we'll say spookysec.local/service-admin. This may or may not work like this. Okay, so that's not going to work. Let's Control C. Let's try it without the spookysec.local first and see if this works. And we'll just try management 2005. There you go. So now we are logged in and you can see the difference here, right? The difference is that we have access to some stuff. Now, if we are not an administrator, chances are we're not going to be able to access this admin folder. Chances are we probably won't be able to access the C folder either. Possibly we can. But there's something interesting here to me already that just stands out. Backup. Okay, backup isn't something that is by default in here, right? I'm expecting to see admin, C, IPC, even netlogon and sysvol. I'm expecting to see those. I'm not expecting to see backup. So what I want to try to do instead is I want to try to connect, and I want to just go and see what's in backup. So I'm going to take out the -L and try to connect to this. And I'm going to say again, management 2005. Okay, let's type ls. And you can see there are backup credentials in here. So let's just get the backup credentials. Just like that. Okay, it says we got them. I'm going to Control C, ls. You can see backup credentials.txt now exists in this folder. Let's go ahead and cat out backup credentials.txt. And it looks funky. Okay, we don't know what this is exactly. My initial hunch was that it is base 64, which it actually is. So what we can do is we can echo like this if we want. And we could do, I think it's base 64-decode. And there you go. Okay, so we have now backup at spookysec.local with backup 2517860 as a password. Now what does that tell us? Well, we can try to connect with that again, and again, it's not going to work. But we get to show off a new tool. So again, we should be thinking, hey, maybe we have access to psexec. We can try to get a shell, see if that works. it's not going to work. But what does a backup account do? A backup account is going to go through and it's going to make a backup. It needs some sort of administrative privileges. It needs to be able to access some things, right? So what is something that we can try with that? Well, we can try to dump hashes. One way to dump hashes, you might see hash dump in Metasploit. You might see Kiwi. You might see Mimikatz, all those other things, but we don't have a shell. We don't have any access. What is something that we can use that we might be able to dump out information without even gaining access or doing any of that? And that tool is called secrets dump. Okay. Now, secretsdump.py is part of the Impacket toolkit as well. And it is absolutely fantastic. I utilize this pretty much on every single assessment. It's more stealthy, in my opinion, than trying to run Mimikatz or Kiwi. It has less flexibility, but it can do quite a bit of the same thing. So if you're in a pinch, or even not in a pinch, this is a great, great tool that you should become familiar with, especially if you're doing assessments. So let's go ahead and use the account we just found. We're going to say it's spookysec.local, and then we're just going to say /backup. And it wants the password, which is backup 2517860, just like that. All right, and then we're going to provide at 10.10.221.125, and we're going to say just DC. Okay, dump that out, and I will show you while that's working. We just go secretsdump.py --help and talk through that real quick. So we're going to dump out what is called the ntds.dit. Okay, so we're grabbing NTLM hashes and Kerberos keys. We utilize this type of dump here all the time in the real world. Okay, you could see everything that's coming through here. Look at all of this information. Now, why is this important? What are we seeing here? What's so special? Well, when we dump the ntds.dit, we're dumping every single user's secret that is stored. Now, when we're doing a domain compromise, say we're in an assessment and we compromise a domain. Well, we go in there when we're done, especially if there's time left over, we dump the domain, we dump the ntds.dit, and we start cracking these hashes. This tells us how strong are the user passwords in the environment. Same thing, if we're doing an assessment, like a password audit, we come in here, we dump the ntds.dit with an admin account that's provided by the client. Then we come in here and we just start cracking passwords of all the users. That will tell us whether or not the users are utilizing strong passwords. If we're cracking like 50% of the environment or even 25% of the environment, probably need a better password policy internally. Okay, so that gives us a good idea, something to give back to the client and say, hey, your password policy could be improved. All right, so from this point, we have a bunch of hashes. Now we can take these, we could try to crack them, do what we need to. We've got the Kerberos granting ticket hash as well. So golden ticket opportunities here. We've got the administrator hash to this machine though. So notice that we just need to grab part of this hash here. So you see this part of the hash is always going to be the same because it's the same everywhere. This is the hash that's different. So the administrator, we can copy this. And this is a local admin account, right? We don't have to go and do anything special with this. We already can attack this. We can do something called pass the hash. So we can pass the hash with a bunch of different tools, but psexec.py does it for us. So if we do psexec.py and do a --help here, the great Impacket toolkit, I'm telling you guys and girls, the great Impacket toolkit, okay? This is just amazing in what it can do. So our usage is the same. We're going to say domain, username, password at the target that we're targeting, except we're not going to utilize a password. We're going to utilize a hash instead. So it says NTLM hashes, format is LM NT hash, don't ask for password. Here you go. So what we're going to do is we're going to just copy that hash out. I think I copied only part of it. We're going to copy the whole thing. See if that works. And then we're going to come in here and we're going to just say psexec.py administrator at in the IP again. And then just paste that hash. See if that works. Okay, so it's working. we would get an access denied if this wasn't working. Right away, we can see it. So we should get a shell here in a second. It's already trying to upload a malicious file and trying to create a service and start it. So let's see if it works. It does. So we're on who am I? And we are authority system on this machine, completely own the domain controller. Okay, where are we at time-wise? Let's see. We are 35 minutes deep into this video, a little bit longer than we usually go with videos. If you are new to Active Directory, this is probably overwhelming. If you've been watching a lot of my content and you've seen Active Directory stuff, you probably followed along pretty well. If you're somewhere in between, that's okay too. The biggest takeaways that you need to do, and you might need to watch this video again, you might need to go brush up on Active Directory, etc. But the biggest takeaways here are Impacket Toolkit, amazing stuff. Okay, we only utilized a couple tools from there today, but psexec, secrets dump, get NT users. There's a bunch of different tools that we can utilize. WMI exec, SMB exec, there's SMB share. There's all kinds of stuff that you can do. SMB map. They've got a bunch of tools inside of Impacket. I really encourage you to explore it. The idea of Kerberos brute forcing should be important to you, although I don't utilize it on assessments. It doesn't mean that you won't ever see it in your life again. The idea of ASREP roasting is very real. The idea of Kerberoasting, understanding the ticket granting ticket and all that whole process, the TGS as well, what a KDC is, SPN, etc. So hopefully that makes sense. If you do like the video, please do comment down below. Hit the like button, hit the subscribe. Thank you again. We're over 130,000 subscribers at this point. We're growing more and more every day. So hopefully this video was enjoyable for you, and I will catch you over in the next video.